I was rummaging around in my bag looking for my notes. My husband said, "Oh, just improvise." And I'm not very good at improvising, even though I've been a teacher ever since I met David 43 years ago, 1980, which is, as a teacher, you improvise. But this is a little different. Asking to introduce somebody. Last year I was asked to introduce David too, and a friend came into town, Francisco, and I got him to introduce David instead, because he was a teacher here for 1,000 years ago, and he had something to say. And after thinking about David for the last few days, I have something to say about David. He was a consummate K teacher, and he taught me so much. I had been working in Minneapolis for 10 years, public school, came here in 1980, and had 8 students in my class from 42. I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. And he said to me when I was trying to teach math, he said, "No, math is life. You're not teaching numbers, you're teaching about life." And we'd sing sometimes, yes, music is life. It's not notation. And he said to me once, if I had a school, I'd just focus on music and math. Do you remember that? So I have the pleasure of just recalling David's work and his support of the teachers that he worked with for those years, where he was the director of education at Oak Grove. And then David Bohm came into the picture, as you all know, and David Moody wrote a book about Krishnamurti's collaboration with David Bohm. He called the book An Uncommon Collaboration. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And that leads me to the next thing I'd like to say about David, which is that in this room for 5 or 6 or more years, David was one of the members of this team called the Bohm Committee. And after Kay died, there was this kind of, well, can we get together? And so David Moody organized these Bohm dialogues. And there were 40 or 50 people, and we'd sit in a circle, kind of, and David Bohm for a weekend would have these conversations to dig deep into consciousness. And they were spectacular in that it took Kay's work into the language level and into the conscious level of the merging of the science mind with the heart. And that's what David, I think, also offers. This David. You can see David Moody on the movie Infinite Potential. If, in case some of you haven't watched that, that's the movie of David Bohm's life. And David Moody is one of the featured speakers in that film. So I am honored and happy to welcome Mr. Moody.
Thank you.
Have fun.
Really good fun. Thank you. Can I put this away like this? Is that okay? Thank you, Karen. Is the mic picking me up all right? Is it working? Is it better now? Okay. Yeah, thank you, Karen, for a lovely introduction. You remembered a couple things that I had forgotten. I didn't remember that about a school that would only teach music and math. I like that idea, though. Before we really get started today, I thought it would be good to think for just a minute about where we are from kind of an historical perspective, because I don't know if everybody is fully aware that these annual gatherings, which are put on by the Krishnamurti Foundation, are an extension, in a way, of what Krishnamurti used to do. He used to come to the oak grove in the spring, April or May of every year, not every year, but almost every year, and give public talks. So these gatherings are a continuation of the pattern that he established. He established that pattern way back in 1929, actually. It was the first time he spoke in the oak grove. You may remember that he and his brother first came to Ojai in July of 1922. So last July represented exactly 100 years since Krishnamurti and his brother Nitya came to the valley. And when they came here, they were not planning on staying for any particular length of time. Actually, they were on their way from Australia to Switzerland, taking the long way around. And they stopped in Ojai, intending to stay just for a few months to see if the weather here was conducive to Nitya's illness. But they loved the valley, and Krishnamurti made it basically his home, the nearest thing that he had to a home for the rest of his life. And because he liked it so much, right away in 1922 when they came, then a few years later in 1927, Annie Besant came all the way out here to Ojai. And she too was kind of enchanted with the beauty and the kind of feeling of the valley. And she is the one who initiated the purchase of a couple hundred acres of land, both here, exactly here on this property where the oak grove is, where the school is, and the oak grove proper, and the land adjacent to it, as well as more land in the upper Ojai. She purchased all that, or initiated the purchase in 1927. And then in 1929, Krishnamurti first gave his public talks in the oak grove. And that's a pattern that he continued right up until the last time he gave talks here, which was 1985. So here we are in 1923, 38 years later. It's kind of remarkable that the Krishnamurti Foundation and the Oak Grove School have sustained this work, really made it thrive all this time. It's really, in my view, a tremendous credit to all the people who work in the foundation and the school that this work is still going so strong. And even just to put on this weekend gathering, I'm not formally affiliated with the foundation or the school, but on account of I give this talk, I'm just close enough to it so that I can see all the work that goes into just preparing this gathering. So I think, we need to give a special, tip of the hat and thanks to Francisco and Jackie and Corey and Sycamore and Dean and probably a dozen other people who, work collaboratively together very, very well to produce this weekend gathering. And as long as we're thinking historically, I can't help but mention in passing, before I start with my talk, what a strange kind of historical coincidence it is that this year the gathering is occurring on the same day as the coronation of the British monarchy. I think that's got to be a first. I was up pretty early this morning and I saw a little bit of it on television. I didn't see it's such an elaborate ceremony. I didn't see the ceremony itself, but I saw immediately after where Charles and Camilla were in this gold carriage, a horse-drawn carriage, and the carriage is made of gold. And even though it's a pretty small carriage, just barely big enough to hold Charles and Camilla, it weighs 4 tons because it's made out of gold. That's 8,000 pounds, which is about the weight of 2 pretty heavy American cars. And just in watching that and listening to the commentary, one thing in particular got my attention, which is although they televised this whole several-hour ceremony, there's one little piece of it which they did not televise, and that was this very special kind of side ceremony where Charles gets anointed as God's representative on earth. I'm not kidding. He's anointed with oil, a special oil that came from a very particular special olive tree in Jerusalem. They brought that oil all the way from Jerusalem to anoint Charles as God's representative on earth. And I just couldn't help but wonder and imagine what would Krishnamurti say about this. In my imagination, it would be something rather irreverent, but maybe that's just because that's the way I think of it. Anyway, enough history. Let's come back to the here and now. And I'm pretty sure that all of you know that the theme of this year's gathering is choiceless awareness. And that is a phrase that Krishnamurti used pretty widely and is commonly associated with his work. For example, when Aldous Huxley wrote the introduction to The First and Last Freedom, he made a pretty prominent mention of that theme, choiceless awareness. And it's also the subject of one of the study books, which is produced by the Krishnamurti Foundation. They produce these study books on a variety of topics, freedom, the observer and the observed. I think they have one on meditation and a few others. But this study book on choiceless awareness I find to be excellent. And this is the source for almost all of the quotations that I'll be using today in my talk. So I wanted to say that, at first glance, choiceless awareness kind of looks like something that might be easily attainable, something not too difficult to understand and actualize. For example, I recently attended a seminar where the leader of the group said, choiceless awareness is a pretty straightforward thing. He said it's very similar to the concept of flow. Some of you may have heard of what is called flow. It's a state of mind that is studied by psychologists where you kind of forget about yourself and you give your total attention to whatever activity that you're engaged in. And this is a state that is not uncommon in some people, especially people in certain professions such as athletics or the arts. In fact, just yesterday I was reading about a very well-known basketball player who was talking about being in a state of flow in the playoff games that are going on now. That was Klay Thompson, for those of you who follow basketball. But I'm not sure that choiceless awareness is quite so simple and straightforward. it seems to me that this apparently simple idea actually presents challenges and difficulties which are not so apparent on the surface. So in this talk, I'd like to examine some of those challenges and try to understand what it would mean to overcome or resolve or transcend them. And maybe the first puzzle we come to has to do with the meaning of choice in the context of awareness. Because, ordinarily choice has to do with our actions or behaviors that take place in the outer world. If I want to buy a car, I have to choose which make and model and choose a particular car. Or, if we want to go out to dinner, we have to choose which restaurant to go to. These are choices we make in the outside world. But Krishnamurti is talking about some kind of choice that is connected to awareness, which is a psychological phenomenon. It's a state of mind. So what is the nature or meaning of a choice in the context of the psychological field? Because it seems pretty clear we have to know what kind of choice could be associated or enmeshed in awareness in order to understand what is choiceless awareness. So I think we can begin by looking at the meaning Krishnamurti has attributed to choice in this context. If we look at a variety of quotations taken from his talks over a period of many years. And as we consider these quotations, I think it's good to bear in mind, that Krishnamurti always spoke extemporaneously. He never spoke from notes. He didn't have any kind of blueprint or preconceived analysis that he referred to. And so his explanations of things like what he meant by choice or choiceless didn't follow any strict pattern. He didn't have like a dictionary definition that he used every time he used that word. Instead, he used words and phrases that occurred to him at the moment that he was speaking. So I think we have to look at a variety of ways that he expressed what he meant and see if we can find an overall pattern rather than hoping for a strict definition or anything like that. So here's the first quotation. All relationship is a mirror in which the mind can discover its own operations. And in that mirror of relationship, one can see oneself as one actually is, but only if one is capable of looking without judging, without evaluating, condemning, justifying. So I put this quotation first because it gives kind of a good general orientation. He talks about without judging or evaluating, which is kind of a general concept, but then he focuses it with by talking about no condemnation or justification, which is a little bit more concrete. It's more like the psychological action that grows out of the background of evaluation. And I should also point out that those words, condemnation and justification, if you look at all the times that Krishnamurti discusses choiceless awareness, those are the two words that he uses more often than any others. I probably could have found half a dozen or maybe a dozen places where he uses that pair of words together. And I didn't, in the remaining quotations, I have 4 or 5 more, I didn't keep bringing ones up that use those words because I wanted to show you a variety of ways, but just pointing out that's the most frequent way that he explains what he means by choiceless. So the next pair of quotations kind of go together. You can't be totally aware if you are choosing. If you say, this is right, this is wrong, the right and wrong depend on your conditioning. And again, being aware of your conditioning, you must watch it choicelessly. You must see the fact and not give an opinion or a judgment about the fact. I don't have anything to add to this particular quotation. I should say, I hope you don't mind, I know that most of the people in this room can see the screen perfectly well, and you don't need me to read it out loud to you, but there might be some people in the back who can't see it very well, and there are probably any number of people who are watching and listening online, and I don't know if they can see it, so I'm going to go ahead and read the quotations, and I hope it's not too annoying for those of you who can, read it for yourself. Next one says, you have to watch the movement of yourself, following every thought, every feeling, every intention, every motive. Just watch it. That watching is also listening. It's being aware with your eyes, with your ears, with your insight of all the values human beings have created and by which you are conditioned. I wanted to bring in this quotation because here Krishnamurti is, he's sweeping with such a broad brush, talking about all the values human beings have created are kind of up for grabs when it comes to this question of observing choicelessly. Can I discover that I am greedy and be aware of my condemnation of greed? That very word greed is a condemnation, is it not? To be aware of greed is also to be aware of the desire to be free of it, and to see why one wants to be free of it, the whole process. So this quotation I included because he says the very word greed is a condemnation. I think it's important to point that out because that word condemnation is a very heavy word. It sounds like something very emphatic and maybe a little bit drastic. But in the way Krishnamurti is using it, it can be something quite subtle and kind of elusive. It can just be something which is implicitly like an overtone in a word like greed. He says something similar in another quotation about envy, how the very word envy contains overtones of condemnation. In the last slide on this particular subject, please look into yourself deeply, not according to Freud or anyone else, but actually. And to look at yourself, you must be free to look. If you say, this is right, this is wrong, this is good or this is bad, I must do this or I must not do this, then you're not free to look, to observe, to wander in this extraordinary field of consciousness. So I included this one because it's kind of a good summing up of the whole concept, but also especially because of these final phrases, which they kind of give you a feeling, a flavor of the state of mind that he's groping towards. Free to look, to wander in this extraordinary field. So choiceless awareness is not like something, this compulsory thing that you have to do in order to achieve something, but it enables you to be free to look, free to wander. That's kind of the spirit of what is intended, I think, by that phrase. So, from these quotations, it seems that choiceless awareness is primarily about inward psychological events, including thoughts, feelings, motivations, desire, as well as the actions that follow from these states of mind. It's an awareness in which I'm observing all of these things closely, but without any judgment of any of it. And I think it might not be obvious at first glance just how radical this proposal really is, because we live in a social and cultural world in which the evaluation of ourselves and of one another is a pervasive feature of daily life. We're taught from the earliest age to think in terms of right and wrong, good and bad, positive and negative assessments of ourselves and of one another. These reactions often occur within ourselves very quickly, and they may be somewhat subtle, sometimes just an elusive sensation of approval or disapproval, like or dislike. And this is the fundamental way in which we navigate our relationships. It's like the psychological ocean in which we swim from moment to moment. So when Krishnamurti suggests that we observe ourselves without any of this coming into play, he's asking us to put aside a lifetime of acquired values and assessments. And this is not something we can do just by deciding to do it. These reactions occur of their own accord. Sometimes they're contained in our thoughts, and sometimes they're too quick for thought. They're built into the structure of our nervous system from an early age, and they don't simply disappear just because somebody suggests they might be unnecessary or dysfunctional. So I'd like to suggest a kind of thought experiment, something that we can do together that may help bring into focus the magnitude of the challenge we are presented with in choiceless awareness. So I'm going to suggest that we think of a series of observations beginning with something far distant from us and then coming step by step closer to ourselves. And we might begin by thinking of another species altogether, perhaps a dolphin or even a dinosaur. And I think we can imagine watching the behavior of a dolphin or a dinosaur with very little sense of condemnation or justification entering into our observation. In the case of a creature so distant from ourselves, we can watch almost everything it does without judging it as good or bad, right or wrong. It's just the behavior of that species. We might find it interesting, we might like to understand it, we might enjoy simply watching it. But the impulse to condemn or justify any particular action or behavior is probably very much diminished or absent altogether. But now coming one step closer to ourselves, now think of a human being, someone who's far removed from our everyday life, someone who lives in a completely different culture, very distant from us in time and place. Maybe even imagine someone living before civilization even began, say 30 or 40,000 years ago, someone living in a tribe 40,000 years ago. If we could somehow magically observe someone like that going about their daily life, we might be able to put aside our customary mode of evaluation. Even if that person did something that seemed strange or embarrassing to us, we might be able to observe it objectively, dispassionately, without feelings of approval or disapproval. Or maybe not. Even with someone so far removed from ourselves, it might be difficult to observe any human being without our ingrained sense of judgment being evoked by what we observe. But then take it a step closer. Imagine someone who lives within the borders of our own country, our own culture, our own time and place. I think you can see that now we have crossed over into a place where the apparatus of our judgments and evaluations almost inevitably comes into play. If that person were to do something unethical or irresponsible or even outside of the norms of fashion or manners, we would probably be quick to impose our sense of right and wrong, good and bad, like and dislike. And we can continue this experiment by thinking of people closer and closer to ourselves, someone in our own work environment or our neighborhood or someone prominent in our community. And then consider someone in your own family, how you tend to criticize or defend your uncle or your cousin or your brother or your mother or your own child. And finally, of course, we come to the very center of our social and psychological world, which is ourselves. How we react or respond with positive or negative judgments to our own thoughts and feelings and motives and behavior. And here I think you will see that the impulse to defend, to explain, or to criticize ourselves, now this whole network of condemnation or justification is almost irresistible. So choiceless awareness means somehow putting all of that aside, means looking at ourselves with that same sense of objectivity and dispassion that we started with when we imagined observing a dolphin or a dinosaur. It really represents a revolution in the way we think about things and react during the course of daily life. So this is the first thing to understand about choiceless awareness. It's an entirely new way or mode of self-observation. It's not merely a kind of awareness that leads to or precipitates psychological change. In itself, it already represents a profoundly different way of going about our daily life. So, with this understanding in mind, I think the next question that arises must be something like this. If choiceless awareness consists of such a major change, why exactly would we want to engage in it? Ordinarily, if someone proposes a significant alteration in our way of living, it comes along with a good reason or incentive or motivation. So I think it's fair to ask, what is the incentive or motive that Krishnamurti is offering in this case? Well, as some of you might anticipate, here we arrive at another major challenge associated with choiceless awareness. Because Krishnamurti maintains that it can only occur if you have no motive to engage in it whatsoever. In other words, any motive in itself represents a kind of choice, and therefore a denial of the essential meaning of choicelessness. Now, this represents another fundamental point, so let's look again at exactly how Krishnamurti expresses it. One of the many places where he touches upon this issue came up when a questioner asked him about introspection. The questioner said, isn't choiceless awareness really just another way of describing the more familiar process of introspection? And it turned out that was a very good question to elicit the meaning of choiceless awareness. Because you might think that Krishnamurti would see or acknowledge, sure, there are certain similarities between choiceless awareness and introspection, but no, he does not. In fact, he goes on at length, 2 or 3 pages in this book, explaining the differences between the two. And one of the differences, perhaps the main one, has to do with the very issue that we're discussing, which is whether we're looking at ourselves with a motive, seeking some kind of result. So I have 3 slides to show you on this subject, and they're all taken from that one answer that he gave to the man or woman who asked about introspection. Oops, that's out of place. Here we go. He said, you introspect in order to become something. Otherwise, you would not indulge in introspection. You would not examine yourself if there were not the desire to modify, change, to become something other than what you are. Awareness is entirely different. Awareness is observation without condemnation. There is no end in view, but awareness of everything as it arises. Introspection is self-improvement, and therefore it is self-centeredness. In awareness, there is no condemnation or identification, therefore there is no self-improvement. There's a vast difference between the two. So here again, I think we need to pause and reflect what an unusual proposal this is, because in most fields of life, whether it's the workplace or in school or in our hobbies or our leisure time, our society and culture actively encourage us to establish goals and objectives. We're kind of expected to have clear-cut incentives, as if that is what will enable us to succeed in life, to be happy and fulfilled. But here Krishnamurti is saying, find out what it means to do something without any motive whatsoever. Can you do something revolutionary, something like choiceless awareness, without any incentive or goal or preconceived objective in mind? Now, The suggestion to act without a motive brings another issue into focus, because if there's no particular goal or objective to be achieved, what is the point of choiceless awareness? Why bother with it? Especially if it represents such a major change, why engage in it if it isn't going to get us anywhere? And this is really a most crucial issue, because choiceless awareness is not an exercise in becoming someone better than what we are. It won't help us get into heaven. The point of choiceless awareness is entirely different, and it is very simple. It is the state of mind that is necessary in order to see clearly. Because, according to Krishnamurti, whenever we allow condemnation or justification to enter into our observation, it has the effect of distorting whatever we are observing. It's a source of interference with clear perception. So we engage in choiceless awareness, not in order to arrive at some destination or to improve ourselves, but simply in order to see without the distortion introduced by judgment of what we are seeing. Now, you may say that seeing itself represents a kind of motive, but there can be an action that you do for its own sake, not for the sake of where it will get you or what you will achieve. In educational circles, this is called intrinsic motivation, in contrast to the extrinsic motivation of wanting to get good grades or be first in your class or win some kind of prize. This is really what real learning is all about. It's the joy, the intrinsic joy of discovering, where the means and the end are one. So the point of choiceless awareness is simply to see clearly, not to improve ourselves or achieve some goal or objective. But I guess we could also ask, why should we care so much about seeing clearly? Well, for Krishnamurti, choiceless awareness and seeing clearly without distortion are closely linked with another basic principle, which he calls self-knowledge. Now, this is a term that we have to approach carefully, because in Krishnamurti's language, self-knowledge is quite different than knowledge per se, or knowledge in itself. Krishnamurti says that knowledge itself represents the past. It consists of memory. It's something we accumulate so that we have more and more and more of it. But self-knowledge in Krishnamurti's vocabulary is quite different. It's not the kind of knowledge you accumulate. It doesn't consist of memory. So here is how he describes self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is not a thing to be bought in books, nor is it the outcome of a long, painful practice and discipline, but it is awareness from moment to moment of every thought and feeling as it arises in relationship. And here's how Krishnamurti explains the necessity for this kind of awareness. He says, what is important surely is to be aware without choice, because choice brings about conflict. When you raise the question of conflict, that's kind of a rock bottom issue for Krishnamurti. It's something that we'll discuss later on. If choice brings about conflict, for him, that's the end of discussion, because you don't want conflict. We'll go into that a little bit later on. The necessity of understanding ourselves is perceived only when we see that without self-knowledge, there can be no basis for thought, for action, for feeling. But self-knowledge is not the outcome of the desire to achieve an end. So here is one of the ways where he expresses it very succinctly, why you would want to have self-knowledge, which is to see clearly, not to achieve some preconceived goal that you want to achieve in the future, but just because without it, you have no basis for doing anything. Thinking, feeling, acting, you have no foundation for it if you don't understand yourself from which you're operating. Here he comes at it from another perspective. You work a great deal when you go to the office. You have to work to earn your livelihood or to do anything else in life. Now, there's a different way of working, which is to inquire into ourselves and to know exactly what is going on within the field of the mind. Not in order to gain some reward, but for the very simple reason that there can obviously be no end to misery in the world as long as the mind does not understand itself. So here we're coming closer to the answer to the question, what's the point of it if it's not going to get us anywhere? Well, the point of it is that you can't do anything reasonable without that foundation of self-understanding. And one more quotation in this series, which brings another kind of dimension into it. He says, I must love the very thing I'm studying. If you want to understand a child, you must love and not condemn him. You must play with him, watch his movements, his idiosyncrasies, his ways of behavior. But if you merely condemn, resist, or blame him, there's no comprehension of the child. Similarly, to understand what is, one must observe what one thinks, feels, and does from moment to moment. That is the actual. And I like this quotation especially because of the very first line, I must love the very thing I'm studying. That's the spirit in which you engage in choiceless awareness. Not to get somewhere, but because you love the thing that you're studying, and the very observation of it has intrinsic meaning for you. So I hope that now we've arrived at a pretty clear picture of what Krishnamurti means by choiceless awareness. The first point is he's referring mainly to how we observe ourselves, our own states of mind, and the behavior that follows. The second point is what he means by choiceless. It's to observe without evaluation, either negative or positive. That is what is called objectivity, or observing dispassionately. And the third point is it's an awareness that occurs without any motive. It's not designed to achieve some purpose other than the sheer clarity of awareness itself. And if you ask, what is the point of it, if it is not going to accomplish some objective, Krishnamurti says, you simply have no foundation for doing anything unless you have a clear, undistorted understanding of yourself. So, now let's say we've come to the point where we have a rough idea of the meaning of choiceless awareness, and we begin to see the reasonableness of it, the validity of it. Then what happens next? How do we set about engaging in or participating in that form of awareness? Well, speaking from experience, I can tell you the first thing, or at least one of the things that is likely to happen if you take an interest in choiceless awareness and want to participate in it. You'll probably see that you're making a deliberate attempt, a psychological effort to engage in it. In other words, you have formed an idea of what choiceless awareness is, and you try to bring your own state of mind into conformity with that idea. But this kind of effort, this deliberate psychological activity, is already not what is meant by choiceless awareness. The very forming of an idea and the attempt to conform to that idea is itself a kind of choice. So the effort to engage in choiceless awareness is self-defeating. Now here I want to show the slide that was out of place, so I have to back up a little bit. Speaking about effort, Krishnamurti says, does not effort mean a struggle to change what is into what it is not? So effort by that definition, is non-awareness. Awareness reveals the significance of what is, and the complete acceptance of the significance brings freedom. So awareness is non-effort. Distortion exists whenever there is effort. And then to kind of wrap up that thought, action based on an idea, which is the kind of thing I was describing, is obviously the action of choice, which is why you can't make an idea out of choiceless awareness and then attempt to live according to that idea. So, choiceless awareness is not an activity that you can choose to engage in. This represents a fundamental fact, a basic reality that you're likely to run into over and over again. And you may have to confront this fact many times before it really begins to sink into the depths of your consciousness. So, what is the meaning of this activity? What are we supposed to do with it? How does it enter into us or affect us in any way? Well, one way that choiceless awareness may affect us is simply as a kind of byproduct or indirect result of our study of it. Simply by bringing attention to this issue, you may begin to see all the ways in which your awareness is not choiceless. So, the study of choiceless awareness may not at first precipitate choicelessness. Instead, what it precipitates is the discovery that your awareness is not choiceless. But this is an important discovery. It is the beginning of what Krishnamurti calls self-knowledge, which is awareness of the ways that the self actually operates from moment to moment in daily life. So, I don't think choiceless awareness is something you can deliberately set out to do, but it is something you can study and learn about. You cannot perform it, but you can watch to see whether or not it is occurring, and if it is not, you can see the implications of that fact. Suppose you find yourself embarrassed about something you've done, feeling foolish, or being angry with yourself. All these are forms of what Krishnamurti calls condemnation. So you've discovered that your awareness is not choiceless. Then, can you see how those reactions distort your observation of the actual thing that you have done? So, choiceless awareness is not a goal. It's not a prescription for action. It is more like a doorway into understanding your own psychological structure and dynamics. It's kind of like a puzzle. And as you contemplate the meaning of the puzzle, you may find yourself catching glimpses of what that state of mind is actually like. So choiceless awareness is an avenue for exploration. If you approach it as an inquiry, not so much to implement, but to discover what it means, then, like a deep mine in the earth, it will begin to reveal its riches to you. So, I'd like to switch gears now and discuss this question at another level. Because we've been talking about choiceless awareness as if it's a self-contained topic, all by itself, and not necessarily related to the rest of Krishnamurti's teachings. And that is not really the case. You know, the teachings are one continuous fabric of observations, and each of the topics and themes he addresses is related to all of the others. So before we conclude, I thought we should try to see if we can locate choiceless awareness within the larger tapestry of the teachings as a whole. Now, this is not an easy thing to do because we don't have any map or picture of the teachings as a whole. And Krishnamurti's teachings are incredibly comprehensive. They cover the entire field of life and consciousness and every significant issue within that field. And as far as I know, no one has ever even attempted to construct any kind of map or blueprint that would depict the whole of the teachings and show how all of the topics within it are related to one another. So it's not easy to explain how choiceless awareness fits into this larger field. And so when I first started thinking about this, I thought, well, it might just be impossible. But then something occurred to me that could give us a rough idea, sort of a first approximation of where choiceless awareness fits into the overall picture. And for this purpose, I'd like to refer to a chapter in Krishnamurti in America. Now, this book is primarily a biography. It covers all of Krishnamurti's life, but it gives special attention to his life in the United States because those are the events that previous biographers have tended to overlook. But Krishnamurti's life is inseparable from his teachings. So to write his biography means you also have to look at the teachings and how they were expressed and developed over the course of several decades. So after covering all of that material, at the end of the book, I included a chapter called The Teachings in Perspective. And in this chapter, I made a very modest, very preliminary effort to look at the teachings as a whole and try to see how the parts of it all fit together. Now, one way I approached this question was to make a list of a few of the most quintessential, most characteristic statements associated with Krishnamurti's work. I'm sure someone else might make a different list, shorter or longer, and I'm not trying to say that this list is definitive or anything like that, but I do think it is representative of some of the most salient points. So I'll show you the list, and I'm going to try to explain how choiceless awareness is related to each one of these statements. And I think this exercise might give us some added perspective and help reveal why choiceless awareness is a fundamental element of the teachings. So, be a light to yourself. You are the world. Where there is division, there must be conflict. The observer is the observed, and time is the enemy of man. Now, the first statement, be a light to yourself, or some version of it, tends to come toward the beginning of Krishnamurti's talks. It represents a very elementary principle for him. He says, don't accept anyone as your authority in the psychological field. You cannot find clarity by accepting the guidance of any priest or philosopher or guru. So the first principle of inquiry is to stop following anyone, including Krishnamurti, which doesn't mean don't listen to him. It just means don't accept what he says just because he is the one who said it. So how does this relate to choiceless awareness? When we impose a framework of value judgments on our own thoughts and feelings, those values are generally what we have been absorbed from society. They represent what we've been taught by our family, our schools, the social media, and many other sources of influence. So this is our conditioning. And to be a light to yourself is a form of awareness in which all of that subsides or goes into abeyance. And so we're left simply to observe the facts of whatever is going on within ourselves, which is to observe without the psychological action of choice. Now, the next statement, you are the world, has a very interesting and unexpected relationship to choiceless awareness. As far as I understand it, you are the world means that we are all very similar to one another psychologically. We generally don't recognize that because we pay more attention to our differences. different nationality, different social class, different religion, and so on. But Krishnamurti maintains that all these differences are really rather superficial, because underneath the differences, we all share a common structure of consciousness. We all experience fear and confusion and loneliness. We all have a mind that is dominated by thought, which sees the world through the filter of the past and which sees the world in fragments. This common structure, the area where we are similar to one another, is much more important than the superficial differences. Now, when we observe ourselves choicelessly, it is this common structure that we're giving attention to. By putting aside any form of condemnation or justification, we start to observe the actual operation of our minds, and this is what Krishnamurti calls self-knowledge. And part of what is interesting about this is we're not just observing ourselves. We're observing the mind of human beings, of all human beings. The basic underlying operations that we all share in common. So in choiceless awareness, you are really coming into direct contact with the fact that you are the world. Now the next statement, where there is division, there must be conflict, is one that Krishnamurti often refers to as a law. I don't know of any other statement that he repeatedly refers to as a law, so I like to call it Krishnamurti's law. I'm sure he would probably object to that and say that it's not his law, it's a law of nature or a law of the universe or something like that. But I'm not aware of anyone else who has ever made this statement, so I hope he will forgive me for calling it Krishnamurti's law. Now, the whole issue of conflict occupies a very central role in Krishnamurti's teachings. He weaves it into a lot of the themes he discusses. I think he regards psychological conflict as the essence of disorder, kind of a surefire symptom of dysfunction in the psychological field. But his objection to conflict is not from any kind of moral perspective or anything to do with right and wrong or good and bad. His objection is just a factual matter. He says conflict is a wastage of energy. That's what he objects to. And that's why he feels it is very important to understand conflict and resolve it. So, where there is division, there must be conflict, represents a core principle in understanding the origin of conflict. And choiceless awareness is completely in harmony with Krishnamurti's law, because the action of psychological choice is inherently divisive. It's based on a division between right and wrong, and it's based on a division between one part of the mind, which is making a judgment, and another part of the mind, which is being judged. So choiceless awareness is awareness without conflict. And therefore there is no wastage of energy, and therefore your observation is more complete, more acute. And that is the kind of energy you need in order to face facts and to remain with facts. So choiceless awareness and Krishnamurti's law really go hand in hand with one another. Now, the statement that the observer is the observed is, of course, one of Krishnamurti's most well-known and most characteristic statements. But it has a particular significance or consequence that might not be quite so well known. And that significance is this. Suppose I am angry or jealous, or I have some other unpleasant emotion. If I feel that I am separate from that emotion, I can try to control it, or suppress it, or do something about it. But if I deeply feel or see that I myself am the same thing as that anger or jealousy, then I can't do anything about it. I can't act upon it. And therefore, All I can do is to remain with it, to observe it, and perhaps to understand it. And that is a very similar principle to choiceless awareness. When there is no choice, there is no acting upon the thing that you observe. Therefore, there is the opportunity to stay with it, to examine it closely, and to see the thing for what it is. And so, when the observer is the observed, choiceless awareness almost automatically has to come into operation. Now, the last statement on our list requires a little bit of explanation, because Krishnamurti uses the word time in a particular way, and if you're not familiar with it, you might not understand what he means when he says things like, time is the enemy of man. Because according to Krishnamurti, there are two different kinds of time. The ordinary meaning is what he calls chronological time. And that is the everyday thing that we measure with a clock or a calendar, and Krishnamurti has no problem with it. He says, he's not saying that chronological time is the enemy of man. He says that kind of time is perfectly reasonable and useful in everyday life. But then he says that we misuse chronological time when we apply it in the psychological field. For example, we like to use time to measure our psychological progress. We imagine the person we would like to be in the future, and we try to become or conform to that image. That is what Krishnamurti objects to. He calls this psychological time, and he considers it responsible for a great deal of mischief and misery. He says this kind of time is illusory. It does not really correspond to anything that actually exists. And so our belief in psychological time means that a lot of our energy in life is dedicated to an illusion. And that is why psychological time is the enemy of man. Now, there are a couple of ways that psychological time is related to choiceless awareness, but I will just mention one of them. We talked earlier about forming an idea of what choiceless awareness is and then trying to conform to that idea. In other words, we make a deliberate effort to engage in it, and that is a contradiction. You have defeated choicelessness in the very effort to engage in it. And so, if choiceless awareness is going to take place, it must happen effortlessly. It happens of its own accord, in a sense, because you see for yourself the necessity of it. Now, for Krishnamurti, there seems to be a very clear distinction between action according to an idea and acting effortlessly. But in daily life, that distinction might not always be so clear to us. It might not be obvious which kind of activity we're engaged in. But I think there's a way to make the distinction clear, and that is, when you're acting according to an idea, psychological time is involved. It may only be implicit, but you're acting with respect to the future. It's the same thing if you have a motive or a goal that you're trying to achieve. The goal is in the future. It only exists in psychological time. And if psychological time is illusory, then so is that goal. So, choiceless awareness does not take place in psychological time. It's a state of mind that is not concerned with what I will be or become in the future. It's a form of awareness that is attentive to what is happening now without concern for what benefit that awareness may bring me later on. So, the point of this exercise was to examine choiceless awareness from different points of view, to hold it up to the light of different perspectives. And I think we can say that it fits very well into the overall tapestry of the teachings. It's consistent with many other themes and principles. And in this process, we've discovered something else, and that is that the teachings are highly coherent. They form a unified picture, one in which the various parts are in harmony and not in contradiction with one another. And finally, I would just like to point out, in closing, the originality of everything we've been discussing today. Krishnamurti is a unique individual in the history of the world because his teachings are unique. They cannot be understood in the context of any other philosophy or religion or any other framework. Of course, you may find certain points of contact or some similarity with things that other people have said. I'm not denying that, but I don't think you will find anyone else who has examined the entire field of life and human consciousness so comprehensively, in so much detail, and with so many original insights. So if at times you find his work to be challenging or puzzling, don't be put off or discouraged. He's working at a very deep level and in a very original way. It may not be easy because it's something new, something the world hasn't seen before. But if you have a little patience, I think you will find it's always illuminating. So I think we're going to take some questions now, but you can also reach me through my website, where there's a contact page that connects up with my email, and I'm always happy to hear from people. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with any questions or comments or anything else you would like to communicate.
For all of you to at least stand up, stretch, breathe, and if you have to run to the toilet, do that. So while people walk in, and that's fine, no, we're not worried about that. We just want to put some questions to David to clarify things. We have only very little time. 12 o'clock is lunchtime, so we have to stop. We have a hard stop in 18 minutes. As you know, my name is Jaap Sluiter. This is Lea Luong and David Moody, of course. Yes, so I don't know, Lea, do you want to start? Or I have also all kinds of things, but...
Yeah, I wrote some questions down.
Yeah. And then after we ask some questions, and then there's a microphone that's going to be put out.
Yeah, it's right there in the middle.
Oh, it's there in the middle, and then later on you can come there and ask questions to the microphone. Okay.
Yeah, so I did have a question for you, David. How do you know if you're actually looking at something, you're watching something, being aware of it, or if it's just a fragment that feels that it's observing?
You know, I don't think there's any formula for something like that. You just have to, it's a matter, you have to, it's because the reason a question like that comes up is because you kind of isolate it from everything else in your life. But if you are engaged in this kind of inquiry on a regular basis, you know, throughout the day as a part of the fabric of your life, then I think these things, these kinds of distinctions become clearer just during the course of your observation. I can't give you a measuring stick or a blueprint how to do that. I just feel like if you're serious about it and you apply yourself to this kind of thing in a sustained way, then not only this question, but a lot of questions like this gradually become clear. But you know how they become clear? They become clear through observation. You observe, and it's the observation, not something that you kind of figure out or rationally deduce, but you see for yourself what is the case.
Good. Yeah. I don't know how to ask the question, but I will just, like all of us are in our head, in our thinking, thoughts come up. And I want to ask you what is the relationship between insight and choiceless awareness? If there is any relationship. And what is insight? Because Krishnamurti, on the screen was also the word insight was mentioned a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. That goes pretty deep. I tried to say in that same chapter that I referred to, the teachings in perspective, that Krishnamurti speaks in terms of two kind of families of psychological activity. One family contains observation, awareness, attention, insight, intelligence. And another family includes thought, analysis, knowledge, and a few other things. So when you ask what is the relationship between awareness and insight, well, they have a close relationship. They're cousins. They belong to the same family, the same network of kind of psychological activity. I think you could say insight grows out of observation. It grows out of awareness. Insight is a kind of special form of observation in which you are not just seeing what is happening, but you're seeing some relationship between the parts of what is happening that previously you hadn't noticed or hadn't overlooked. I've often thought that there could be a whole section of a school curriculum devoted to the question of insight and showing how it goes beyond knowledge, but accompanies knowledge. And you can find interesting examples of insight in any field, mathematics or social studies or poetry, what have you. And it would be good to, in a school, especially a school of this kind, to cultivate some sensitivity to the activity of insight in many different spheres of life.
But then, would you say there's a relationship between an insight into a mathematical problem or a mathematical question and insight into the psyche, how thought operates, or how do you feel that there's a relationship between it? I'm just asking.
Yeah.
Because the mathematics seems to be in knowledge somehow, or
So I don't know. Probably not a very good relationship there, but they have a similar quality in the sense that they are a matter of a form of seeing that cannot be contained strictly in knowledge. So there is a certain similarity. These are what Bohm and Krishnamurti have called partial insights. And the partial insights don't necessarily have that much to do with one another, but they have a similar form in the sense that they represent a kind of seeing which is not just contained in a formula or an equation or something that I memorized out of my textbook.
That actually has a bit to do with one of the questions from online that we received. Someone asked Mr. Moody, if one observes conflict but it does not dissolve, does that imply an incomplete or limited observation, and thus the conflict carries on?
Again, it's one of those things that I can't necessarily say black or white, yes or no. I think that for the conflict to dissolve, you need to see not just the conflict itself, but you need to see kind of the roots of it, the origins of it, and the consequences of it. Somewhere, I had a quotation that I was going to include here, but it didn't make the cut. Krishnamurti says, a tree is not just the flower and the fruit, but it's the branches and the leaves and the trunk and the roots. And he says, in the same way, to understand ourselves, we need to understand the entirety of the thing. And probably the same thing applies in the case of any given conflict. It's not just seeing the conflict itself, but seeing the nature of conflict and what all is involved in going to create that, and what are the consequences of it, what are the roots of it. It's that total understanding that has a chance of really deeply, seriously, actually dissolving the thing.
And I just wanted to say another online question. Is seeing clearly a goal? Is it something we want to achieve?
Well, this comes back to psychological time. If you make an image in your mind of seeing clearly, and you think, wow, I'm going to see clearly, and then I'm going to be really cool tomorrow. Or I can't quite do it right now, but I'm going to work at this, and I'll bet you by the end of next week, I'm going to see clearly. If you're going at it in that sense, you're functioning in terms of psychological time, and you can be sure that it's not going to work. But if seeing clearly, the way you're going to see clearly, it has to do with what Krishnamurti calls the negative approach. He says, don't be afraid of that word negative. The way to see clearly is to see what are the obstacles to seeing clearly. When you see what is preventing you from seeing clearly, then that very perception will make those obstacles drop away. And then maybe seeing clearly will take place.
Did you have any more? Or do you want
Yes. Well, actually, no. Let's go to Johnny.
Hello. Hi there. I had a question I'd like to put to you or the panel about choiceless awareness, and I'm going to start with talking about a question that the ancient Greeks were very concerned with. And I only mention the ancient Greeks just to try to illustrate that for a long time this has sort of been an issue saddled within the human, for humanity, right? For the human psyche. The ancient Greeks were very preoccupied by the question of good health, both in the body and the mind. And one of their central concerns was that through illness or corruption of nature, what is good becomes repulsive to us. And so very famously, the example of when the body is ill, sort of rejecting water, right? Or it being difficult to drink water, something that is good and healing becomes repulsive to us, right? In a feeling. And so I wonder if that's not part of the difficulty when we want to completely release evaluation from our lives, moment by moment. So I guess my question is, in the concern of living, how are we to live with evaluations or the absence of evaluations, in the sense of knowing what is the right thing to do in a particular moment, even if the right thing isn't something that you're preconceiving beforehand, right? I can understand the line of sort of being attached to an ideology and sort of being married to an abstraction. But I wonder if we let go or release all forms of evaluating as it pertains to good and bad, right? How are we to know what is good and know what is harmful? Does that make sense, or am I?
Yeah. Somewhat. I'm not sure I totally understand it, but I kind of get it. I kind of anticipated some question like this, so I have an answer already prepared. One day, I don't know if this will really answer, but it'll kind of give you the spirit of it. One day, I was talking to Krishnamurti in his cottage, in his little living room in Pine Cottage. I was seated on a couch, and there was a little coffee table between us, and he was in a chair. And over by the side of the room, there was a little bug. It was a little pill bug walking along. And we both, for some reason, saw it at the same moment. And so Krishnamurti, we were having some pretty serious conversation about something, I can't remember what. But Krishnamurti stops and he gets up and he very carefully picks up that little bug and opens the door to the cottage and takes it outside and puts it in the garden, right? He didn't do that because of some value that he was taught in school, where you're supposed to be good to bugs or anything like that. He did that out of a spirit of affection for that little bug. So he knew what the right thing to do was without any training or knowledge or anything that he'd been taught by anybody else. Does that help a little bit?
Sure, thank you.
Yeah? I wasn't sure exactly about your question, but I think that's a little bit on focus.
So that seems to imply some sort of sensitivity.
Sensitivity, absolutely, crucial.
So are you saying that sensitivity can override morality? And
well, when you have sensitivity, then if you live according to morality and you're insensitive, you're gonna behave immorally, even though you have the morality. Whereas if you have sensitivity, then you don't need the morality. Somebody else?
My question is more of a practical one. Having been an educator yourself and heading the school, and the school is based on Krishnamurti's teachings, including choiceless awareness and all other things you spoke about, and it's sort of a laboratory of sorts where the kids from an early age are brought up in the midst of these teachings. How do they cope up with life after leaving school, and how do they apply those teachings later in your observation?
Well, that's a tough one because it involves, being aware of what actually happened to a lot of different people after they left the school, which I'm not that aware of. Krishnamurti said that people asked him, isn't what you're trying to present in your schools going to be impractical? Because it's not just totally focused on getting a good career and getting a good college, but brings in all kinds of other issues. And Krishnamurti said, no, we're teaching our students to be intelligent, and that intelligence is going to function and apply in all fields of life. My impression, and it's pretty superficial, it's not based on a lot of observations, but what observations I have, is that Oak Grove does something more than just, breed intelligent people. It does something which is similar to, what is called self-actualization, where students kind of realize their own potential because there's a, if I can use that word, flowering, there's a true manifestation of whatever is wants within them that wants to get out. And that's the thing that I see happening, is people growing into a state of kind of harmony with who they are, and which then, that expresses itself in 1,000 different ways. There's no one way to be self-actualized. It's all different. But that's kind of the thing that I see coming out of the schools, insofar as I'm able to observe, which is pretty limited.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I do have two questions, sort of. The first one, is there anything that you have presented today with your ideas and statements and the basis of the knowledge that you've utilized to make your presentation that is not memory-based, or that you've relied on your memories for which to present them to us? Because I think that's the essence of Krishnamurti.
Yeah.
Memory does not apply. Am I wrong?
Certainly there's a great deal of memory, okay?
I mean, period. Krishnamurti says if memory operates, you are not choiceless in choiceless awareness.
Yeah, I don't think it's that black and white. I mean, certainly there's a great deal of memory in what I do and in daily life, but my impression, you correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I don't want to do that. I've been doing this for 41 years, and I've been playing with God since I was 6 years old, and I decided there was no God for sure by 14. So Krishnamurti was everything, something that he brought everything together. But I've always understood, and I mean that, 41 years, we are a figment of our own memory system. So to say we exist and then say we don't exist, we're having it both ways. And it's important to me, obviously, but so what I'm thinking. But
what is your question? Could you formulate the question?
Is there anything that you have presented today that could have been done without your own memory or the capabilities of your own memory system?
Thank you.
No, my memory system was fully intact and operating, but all I'm trying to say is for me, that does not exclude the possibility that there's some activity of insight which is kind of blended in with the operation of memory.
Real quick, I'll just sit down after this. Do you think understanding or dealing with what Krishnamurti deals with requires a minimal amount of intellectual potential, so that maybe not all human beings will have access to that, or the ability to sit quietly and observe? You
have to understand the words.
No, so in your opinion, so not everybody necessarily would be.
If you don't understand the words, listening to Krishnamurti is not going to help you.
I definitely agree with that.
So there's that, to that extent, there's a minimum amount of intellectual potential. As long as you understand the words, as far as I'm concerned, that's all you need to get in the door.
So some human beings may never understand them.
Sorry?
Some human beings may never understand them.
Because they don't understand the words. They speak a different language. It hasn't been translated into their language.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think I can reach them.
We have a solution for that. We have an insight.
Thank you. I am very privileged to be here. Thank you. This question is sort of extemporaneous, so I hope it makes sense. I was just wondering if Krishnamurti touched on the relationship between choiceless awareness and desire, And the reason why I just came up with that question is because desire is born out of choice and conflict, in the sense that from the moment we're born and they cut that the umbilical cord, we have the choice as individuals to breathe and sustain our life to the very day that we decide to leave or die. So that's a choice, I believe, whereas, it's a desire. And I was wondering how it interrelates with choiceless awareness, because my very limited knowledge of what I have listened to from Krishnamurti, choiceless awareness is something that we do with like every breath and that short space that we breathe in or breathe out. So it's just a way of being, a state of being. And it's not something, as you mentioned, that we grow into or something that we put an effort to do. I think it's quite the contrary.
So before you answer, this is the last question. Sorry, I see you lining up because it's already 2 minutes over. Otherwise, the logistics become difficult. So please, yes.
So I don't think I can answer that totally. I'll just give you a couple things which might give a glancing, approach it from a glancing direction. One is, the thing about it is, it's not black or white, it's a matter of how you look at the desire as it arises. And Krishnamurti has a very interesting take on desire. He says, desire is inevitable. He says, desire is part of life. You can't cut it out. And he says there's nothing wrong with it at a certain level. The problem comes in when thought breeds desire, when thought clings to it and cultivates it, and it's that activity that you have to watch. Where choiceless awareness comes in is, desire arises, do you say, oh, I shouldn't have that. I shouldn't have that feeling. That's not right feeling. If you're doing that, you're lost, in a sense, right? The attitude, I think, that Krishnamurti is pointing to is let it arise. Watch it. See what becomes of it. It may arise and, like a flower, fade away, right? But if you resist it and try to oppose it, you're going to get into all kinds of difficulties. Or if that desire arises and, that feels good, I want more of that, I want to keep that going, right? That's another way to interfere with it, which is going to breed a whole other set of problems. But the desire itself is going to arise. It's part of life, and it's not something to condemn. It's just a question of what becomes of it and how you live with it.
Good, thank you very much. This is lunch is served in the main house, and see you back later on this afternoon.